All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Inside In Tennis Podcast. Mitch Michals here on the Believe Network. A lot of great content, a lot of great stuff going on this great show, on this great network. We're on all your platforms, so make sure you check out this and every episode. Joining us now, a friend of the program, first time on this version of the show, but top 5 player, prominent commentator, coach, does great work at IMG Academy, Jimmy Arias. Welcome to the show. It's been a minute, but excited to catch up with you.
Great seeing you as well, Mitch. Sorry it's not at Tennis Channel Studios. I like those days.
I
But it's
know,
all right.
I know. We're working on
I
the
had to
home setup.
download things. I had to do tech things to get on this show, which was really, tough.
Yeah. Next vision, maybe like a bonus episode. It'll be Jimmy Arias downloads Google Chrome. We'll put that out for the
Exactly.
the special content there.
Supposed to start about 3 hours ago. But
Yeah, Jimmy, though it's been a minute. I do want to ask you as we get going. Lots of great tennis action around the globe right now, but had some time to let it breathe. And I know you're following the sport as well as anyone with your insight. But what's your final takeaways of Australia? Year's first major. Got a new champion on the women's side. Sinner just extends his reign there. Some other great storylines. But what were some of your takeaways from Australia?
I mean, obviously, Sinner's the best player in the world by a level that you wouldn't have expected, I suppose. You thought Alcaraz was going to be right there with him, but no one seems to be close. I don't know how you beat him when I watch. I used to say that about Djokovic as well, I think, because they defended so well. They were so solid. And for Sinner, he just hits the ball so big and has every part of the game sort of mastered at the moment. So he's taken over the men's game. For Maddie Keys, I mean, that's just an amazing story for her. And the fact that she was winning such close matches with the type of swing that she has such a big cut at the ball on the forehand wing. The swing comes from a place that is a little bit on what I would across the plane. It starts from the wrong side of her body, and it's such a big swing that I never thought it would be safe when the biggest moments happened. And she managed to get that all under control. And someone that's been trying that long, had those dreams for that long, and finally comes through. That's a heartwarming feeling.
The player she beat too, right? Like win those close matches, but it was Rybakina, Svitolina, Swiatek, Sabalenka. Like it was the very best in the world. And something you could speak on too, the technology change. We don't really see players. I know it makes sense in theory, like, okay, like, switch some things up, harnessing some of that power, but to make the tech change and have instant success like this is kind of new for the sport.
I mean, look, the game has gotten to where you do have more and more control with the strings and all that sort of stuff that it is an advantage for big hitters. The problem for me in tennis a little bit is it has become a fitness, especially on the men's side, fitness and whoever's mentally stronger and relaxed, because the equipment has made it easier to put the ball in, to work the ball a little bit. And so more and more players play really well, hit really good shots. And it comes down to just sort of these smallest of margins. And I don't know. I liked it back in the day, in the wood racket days 50 years ago, just because it was so hard to play with a wood racket. So if you had the skill to be able to play with a wood racket, you had such an advantage over everyone. Now you don't need that skill as much. You need to be physically and mentally really strong. You're going to be able to put the ball in.
Yeah, it's a good point. I would ask you as well, too. We talk about the champions a lot, obviously, deservedly so. But on the men's side, what was your takeaway from some of these young players that had breakout performances? Fonseca beats Rublev in straight sets. Werner Tien with that win over Medvedev. Mickelson doing well. Some young players really stepping up. Do you think that this is kind of a movement with not the next gen, but the next gen?
Well, Fonseca definitely. I mean, his game is massive. Mickelson also, to me, definitely. He's a player that's going to have success. Werner Tien, I struggle a little bit when you don't have a big serve or a lot of free points on serve to to stay near the top of the game for a long time, because it's just, as I've been saying, it's so physical. And if you're not getting free points on your serve, you're working so hard to win every match. Now, he is helped by the fact that he's a lefty. So Tien's leftiness allows him to open the court and do some great things. But I still think it's hard if you don't have a big serve. So that's, where I feel on that. But yeah, it's great to see these youngsters coming up and doing some damage. As you know, I used to be worried about the fact that the big three weren't getting beaten by anybody. They were just aging out. Yeah. And I wanted the big three to lose to today's players. I've always talked about that. Sinner has done that. Sinner has proven that he deserves to be number one. He's taken out, Djokovic. He's the best player. So that's nice. And I just feel like now these youngsters at some point will be pressing him, even though Sinner is incredibly young.
Yeah, Mensic's the other one I forgot to mention too. He's another one, Jakub Mensik, who had the big win, and Casper Ruud, and keeps it going. That's kind of how it used to be, right? Like, we've been spoiled, or people of younger generations, like, just expect the top players to make every single quarterfinal and semifinal. And Sinner very well may do that along with Alcaraz, but in the heyday, this is how it worked, right? There were upsets. There was young players that broke through. So,
well, there's always these sort of waves of, Connors, McEnroe, Borg, Lendl were consistently doing well in the majors. But then there was that time period where, I don't know, Safin, Hewitt, Thomas Johansson. I mean, there were people winning majors that you didn't think about. That you weren't really thinking about someone that's got a chance to win majors. And then obviously this next generation of greatness happened. The Federer, Djokovic time, Nadal.
The last thing on Aussie, from what you saw out of Novak Djokovic, the level, but also the injury is a part of this too, right? What's your outlook for where he's at, where he could go in this year? See how much left he has in the tank, but the level, and then ultimately the health going forward.
I mean, I think the health is almost more important in some ways than the level. I think the level was pretty good at the Aussie Open. But the health at his age, I don't know how in the world he pulls a muscle. That's what the problem was, right? I mean,
make a strain. Yeah.
I mean, he can lift his leg over his head by 3 feet. I've seen him stretching. It's insane. So I don't know how it's possible for him to pull a muscle, but that obviously was the case. He's still right there. I just need to see what happens when he plays Sinner, feeling at full strength.
It's weird to be like, in one match, we still trust him, like you saw at the Olympics and these big matches, even Alcaraz. But now we're asking questions we haven't asked before, like, how is he going to hold up 3 matches in a row against the league competition? How's the bounce back going to be? It's questions we haven't really had to ask him before.
No, and we don't know the answer to that. I mean, obviously, Father Time catches up with everybody. So at some point, he's not going to be able to compete, and it's probably getting close. And also just, I don't understand how anyone can live the life he's lived for as long as he has done it to be in the type of shape that he's in, when I don't know how he can find any motivation exactly. What does he need to do? I'm pretty sure he doesn't need the money. He has all the records. How do you make yourself do the things that he does when there's sort of nothing left to accomplish?
Especially after the Olympics, when he said for the first time, like, are you satisfied? Like, yes. Like, this is like, yes, I am satisfied.
He did it all. I mean, there's nothing else. So
what was that experience like for you calling Olympic tennis? I know you when tennis got reintroduced to the games, you were an Olympic semifinalist in the LA Olympics in '84 in the singles event. And I know how much as an American it means to be an Olympic athlete and what these games mean. But what was the experience like calling the games in Paris, or for Paris in 2024?
Yeah, that's the difference. I wasn't calling them in Paris. I was calling them in Connecticut. So it's not as exciting as it would be to be actually at the site. Obviously, it was historic from the standpoint of Djokovic going for the only thing he didn't have, playing against Alcaraz. That part is incredibly cool. It was also quite an experience with Andy Murray and getting in the doubles and just the way he was out of so many matches in doubles and somehow they found a way to win. That was a lot of fun. The Olympics is always great, obviously. It is always a little strange to me because I didn't grow up thinking about tennis in the Olympics. It wasn't really a thing. So I never dreamed about a gold medal as a kid. I was dreaming about winning majors and, Davis Cup was the thing you thought about most when you're thinking about playing for your country. So it's interesting. It didn't feel like an Olympic sport for most of my life, tennis. And I still maybe have some residual remnants of that in my mind when I'm watching it.
When you got there, though, and it's the last thing on that, though, like it had to be, like I know you didn't think about tennis growing up, but when you get there and you're with all these other American elite athletes, there's got to be something that kicks in, I should say, like, okay, now I'm an Olympic athlete.
That would have been awesome. The problem for me in LA was I was in a dorm. I was in the LA dorm and the UCLA dorm with only tennis players. And that part was that was annoying because I didn't have that whole Olympic experience really. When I played it, it was a demonstration sport. So I think that's probably the reason why they had us quarantined off to the side.
No, not with Carl Lewis or Michael Jordan or any of these guys.
No.
Okay. Well, you did mention the Davis Cup, and I wanted your take and your thoughts on what we saw last weekend because, hey, you play for your country, right? The emotions might ramp up, and I know you've got stories for a lot of things and that have happened in the tennis world in the last, couple of decades, but we had two separate instances where it got a little heated. The Greenberg's collision, or whatever we want to call that, and then Thibaut and Arthur Fies as well. But do you have any strong takeaways on kind of the passion that we saw in the Davis Cup and how the outcomes tended to be for some of these heated moments?
No, obviously, anytime you're playing for your country, you're feeling a little extra, and for a team. And tennis players don't often get that feeling of playing for a team. It's always an individual sport. So it adds another layer of pressure. I mean, I know for me, one of the most nervous, I couldn't sleep the night before. I knew I was going to end up playing a fifth match at 2-all. We were playing against Ecuador and Andres Gomez. Aaron Krickstein was the other member on the team. We were up 2-1, but Gomez had never lost to Krickstein, and I was pretty sure he wasn't going to lose to him in Guayaquil. So I knew it was going to come down to me, and that was as nervous I've ever felt before a match. So I know the extra pressure and intensity that you feel in those situations. So obviously, I was a little surprised with Garin. I mean, he took a shot to the chin, but I don't know that he
just sat there like it was
knocked out.
It was weird. Like I was watching, I didn't catch the collision, but I turned it on. He's just sitting there, like he would not play. And I thought the umpire, it's a tough spot, right? Because once you decide it's not a DQ, and you can get into whether or not, I personally didn't think it should be, but at a certain point, it's like you have to play. We can't just end the match. I've decided it, and he just wouldn't get up.
He wouldn't get up, and it was. If you saw the collision, I saw it the first time I saw it was at an angle where I thought, okay, this is a complete flop. He got brushed and went down. But then when I saw it from a different angle, he did. It was a shoulder to the cheek. But I don't think he was concussed, and I don't think so. That was the part where it seemed like he's going for the default. He's hoping for the DQ rather than doing it on the court.
Did you have any near moments like that? Maybe not as graphic, but did you ever have any bump ups or dust ups in a setting like that?
I don't know if it was in a setting like that. I mean, yes, I had it in Ecuador. I caused a ruckus because I played the first match of that tie in Ecuador against Gomez, and he'd never lost in Ecuador. And one of the things that the crowd would do whenever you made an unforced error, the entire crowd in unison would go, "Aw." Which, as a player, that's very annoying. And every time you miss, you're going to hear that. And so I'm the kind of guy that if you're doing that to me, I'd like to annoy you as well. So it ends up at 4 on the fifth. I hit an ace, and I said, "Oh," and the crowd went bananas. And I had
Uh,
an ongoing fight with the crowd
mhm.
in that tie. Um, and as far as like with another player, I did have a dust up a couple of times with players, but but never in a Davis Cup situation,
Okay.
only in a tournament situation.
Well, we like the passion too. I think that's part of it, showing that these guys care, especially in the team setting for your country is good. We got more with Jimmy Arias here on the Inside in Tennis podcast, talking about general tennis topics as we continue on. There's some great action, 500 level men's events, Rotterdam and Dallas. Rotterdam has just been very, very intense going forward. Actually, just recording this after Tsitsipas survives a tight match against Tallon Griekspoor, the local guy who's so tough there. 5 top 20 wins in his career there. Was not able to get a sixth. Jimmy Tsitsipas battling through. And like we were talking before, a gritty win. He's been much maligned. He's had issues. He's publicly spoken about some of the issues he's dealing with. The backhand has been shaky, but in this match, finds some resolve, gets broke up, breaks right back, holds off Griekspoor 7-5 in the third. So maybe, dare I say, some maturity for Tsitsipas going forward.
I mean, look, he has a weakness, and that is backhand return a serve, backhand slice, any of those things to that wing it's a weakness. And I would have thought Griekspoor was the perfect guy to exploit the weakness because he does serve and volley pretty well at times. And as you mentioned, in Rotterdam, he's semifinals the last 2 years. He's always having great results there. The crowd, he gets pumped up when the crowd is going on. So I would have given Tsitsipas even though he's a higher ranked guy, 20% chance of winning
Oh,
that
yeah.
match. And he was down match point in the second set in the tiebreak. So came through with a swinging volley on that point. Um, I think this could be something that he might start having some results again. I think his forehand was so good when he was doing well. It seemed as though players couldn't read it at all. So he'd get up to it really early. He had a little bit of Federerness to his forehand, how he'd hit it big and take it early.
Yeah.
That caused people to struggle. Um, I think he maybe lost a bit of that because of the confidence factor or the lack thereof. And maybe he's starting to get that back because he had a nice win in the first round too. Just the score that he won by showed you
Right.
that he's playing awfully well. So maybe he's ready to become Tsitsipas again.
Right. When we talk a lot about players when they struggle, understandably so at this level, but there's still a lot that he does so well. He was serving in rhythm too. You mentioned the attacking style. He's when he has confidence, he's not afraid to, as you say, finish points early. And sometimes we have to judge, obviously, the early loss in Australia, but let's take a breath and look at who he lost to, Alex Michelsen. So I think that loss might not be as bad at the end of this year. So
No,
he
I don't
yeah,
think no, I agree with you.
yeah,
Mickelson's for real. So
yeah,
but I still felt
yeah.
like today's players, when I watch them,
Mhm.
there's not huge holes in too many players' games. You don't see that many holes, and he does have a hole. That
Mhm.
backhand return is a hole. It's just that his strengths are strong.
Mhm.
He serves
It,
big, as you said. He moves great for 6'4". His forehand's
yeah.
nasty, so he's got big strengths as well. It's just, can he hide that weakness enough? It seems fairly easy to get to, and that's the problem.
When we talk about players that maybe have weaknesses or maybe not so much weaknesses, but players that have been scouted properly, I heard you on TC Live yesterday talking about Medvedev, who loses to Bellucci, 2-2 on the season. You know, the loss to Teen in Australia, and now to Bellucci, the best win of his career, certainly. But the point that I thought was so accurate was like it's players realizing that they can't hit through him anymore. This is not somebody that you want to hit with and rally with all day. He'll
I'm
just wear you
I'm
down.
sorry. I'm smiling because it's like it has annoyed me for the last 5, 6
Yeah.
years on how are players not figuring out the guy is in the stands to return serve. You can't power it through him. He's
Yeah.
6'7". He's long. He gets his
Yeah.
racket on the ball, and he's also a magician because when it hits his racket, it goes in.
Hmm.
It's amazing. He hits balls from incredible positions in the court, but they all go in.
But
And
wasn't it cool to see. And it wasn't just Bellucci. We've seen this before, but he was drop shotting him so much that even when it wasn't working, like on an individual point, it wasn't deterring him. I thought that's the thing is like, you got to stay with it. These matches are so long and one point's not going to determine it.
Yeah, you got to stay with it, and you have to stay. This is the part that's harder for today's players because they're not natural serve and volleyers. They don't do it much. You also have to stay with the serve and volley. He might occasionally come up with a winner from the seats, from the stands. But the odds are you're winning the majority of those points when you've pulled him out wide, and all you have to do, you serve and volley, and all you have to do is touch the volley. There's no chance for him to get back if you've hit a volley from him in the position he is after the return. So if you remember, they all should have learned when Kyrgios beat him a couple of times, a couple years ago, serving and volleying. And that should have been like, oh, wait, this is what I need to do. It's just that players aren't comfortable with it. So they haven't really exploited, and they finally are starting to.
Yeah, it was Australia, Rafa coming back, a lot of serve and volley, and it was Kyrgios in Canada and U.S. Open back-to-back, same exact tactical approach. Well, what do you do if you're Medvedev? Can you overcome this new data point? And I don't want to say peaking or downward slope. He's still late 20s, a proven champion, but what's the next step for him to combat this?
Well, he's going to have to at least start getting a little more comfortable trying to return from a little closer up, and not be susceptible to the things that they're doing to him. Not going to be easy because he has to return serve from where he returns serve from. It's a different thing than the normal return of serve. He's taking almost a full swing at returns because he's in the fence. You can't take a full swing when you move up. So I don't know if it won't be easy for him to make that adjustment. It's going to take a little bit of time, and he's going to be stubborn, I would think. He's had so much success with what he's done that it might be difficult for him to make that change. He might have to start, in match figuring that out. Get enough practice at taking it earlier, and then start where he wants to start. But if the guy is serving and volleying him off the court, he's going to have to be able to move up at different times.
That was one of the things where I was going to ask, like, is this something if you were coaching him, and is this something you just play through? Like, is this like, because the schedule doesn't stop, or do you take time to kind of reassess this on the practice courts?
I think you play through it right now, and I think it was off season would have been the time to really work on that positioning for return to serve. And I know he did, interestingly enough, if you remember last year, I think in the finals of the Australian against Sinner, he was exhausted because he played all these, 2 a.m, 3 a.m, 5-set marathons. And so against Sinner, he stood up on the baseline and was crushing the ball, and actually was doing it really well. So I think, as I said, he's a magician. When the ball hits his racket, it goes in. I don't know how when I see his strokes. The way he produces the strokes, they shouldn't be going in every time, but they do.
Some players are doing things unorthodox. He's at the top of that list. So we'll see where Medvedev goes from here. Other notes on players in Rotterdam. We know Alcaraz is doing well, but I wanted to get your thoughts on a couple other players and see if they can maybe get back on track and get to that elite level. Andrey Rublev is one. He lost to Fonseca early. It was interesting too, right? Because I saw in Montpellier, he won his first round match, Jimmy, and his box reacted like he just reached the Wimbledon final. Like it was like a group hug. Everyone's there. So I'm wondering if he's someone that can get that confidence and get back there and, stay up with some of these players that are raising their level and rising up the rankings.
Rublev you're talking about.
Yeah.
Rublev, to me, mentally is on a knife's edge always.
Yep.
And that's the kind of player that you don't know. He could fall out of, the fact that his box is going crazy winning a match in Montpellier tells you something about where he is confidence-wise, or was. He lost to a player, Fonseca, who to me can take the racket out of your hand. He hits the ball so big and does everything well. That's not a loss that should shake your confidence necessarily to that point. But if you remember last year, there was this point in the year where Rublev was struggling. So he's got a strange game. He stands close to the baseline and takes a full cut at every ball, but it's almost the same shot over and over again. So I'm not sure what I think about his chances. We'll see as time goes.
Would you work on that second serve if you were in his corner? Because I
Of
feel like
course.
that's been tagged a lot by the top players.
Of course, that is a huge part
Yeah,
of what he needs, and then he just needs to be emotionally a little bit more even keeled because that's
that's a
where
little harder, I think. I
that's a
think
little
that might
hard.
be the harder thing to work on. But
Yeah, it might be. So those are the couple of things that he does need.
other player that I wanted to get your take on, because it's been up and down. We might have some stability in his camp at Holger Rune right now. He's been flying through coaches back and forth with a few of them. Christensen's in his camp, a voice he's trusted. I'm wondering, and that's why I wanted to ask you, are there signs that he could finally have that breakthrough? This is a very confident guy who believes he should be in the very top of the sport. Do you see that realistically happening in the near future?
He's another tough one because the results have been so uneven when he's had the thing he does have going for him, at least outwardly, he comes off as he believes in his greatness. He thinks he should be right in at the top of the game. Um, he does have an interesting style in that he can play so many different types of tennis. He can play super aggressive. He can come in. I've seen him where he suddenly decides he's going to run down every ball and not miss. And when he does that, he does it really well. So he does have a lot of tools that he can utilize. I'm not sure why it's been so up and down, and mostly down for him for what he's hoping for lately, for the last year or so. And it's also interesting. It depends on how he takes. If you remember, probably a year or two ago, I'm not sure exactly the time frame. It was Sinner, Alcaraz, Rune. Which one of those is going to be who's
Mhm.
those are the new big three.
I mean,
And
he called it the big three
yeah,
himself.
okay, perfect. So that he's putting himself in the
Yeah,
big three, and then all of a sudden the
yeah.
big two
Mhm.
just absolutely leaps and bounds ahead of him. And I don't know if he takes sort of gets down on himself for not joining them, or he takes it as a challenge that what they've done it, but I'm going to do it too. I'm not sure
Yeah.
what kind of guy he is on that.
There's just lulls in some of his matches where he just head scratching decision making, all of it processing. Djokovic match at Wimbledon, he came out really flat in the first set. That's the stuff. You clean that up because the weapons are there. There's so much potential, but potential only gets you so far. So
Exactly.
the other tournament this week, the ATP 500 in Dallas. It's always nice to kind of have. It's always nice. We're biased, but the American tennis events, and also upgrading this one to a 500 level at the Cowboys practice facility, which seems to be open this time of year. but but no, in the 500 event there looks great, and the field is pretty stocked heavy with a lot of Americans and some international flavor as well. So this event, Jimmy, I think could be a mainstay for years to come.
I hope so. Yeah, obviously, it's always great for the Americans, especially right now. We have American. I, they're doing really well. I know that they're not at the very, very top of the game yet, but boy, do we have a lot of youngsters that are pretty good players. And it's nice to see Reilly Opelka
Mm.
back, because I do think he's kind of a top 10 level player if he could stay healthy and maybe a little more positive, because there's almost, he'll be in the middle of matches and start saying he stinks or he can't do this or he can't, how can I mean, he
Yeah.
needs to talk nicer about himself, and I promise you, he'd be top 10 in the world with the weapons that he has.
He had the wrist injury and the hip injury, but the hip is the one he's moving pretty well right now, and that's good to see that because that we thought could have been just like a death sentence for his career. Even though match in Australia against Mahach, who's a great player, was able to go deep into that one. So I'm optimistic on Opelka. All these Americans doing well. You had Tommy Paul, survive Brooksby in his first match. We can get to Brooksby in a second, but Paul coming out, top 10 for the first time. The mindset changes, right? Was it different for you the first time you played when you had that single number next to your name?
No,
Okay.
because I was a little
Younger?
Holger Rune at that
Okay.
time. I had the I, I remember winning French Open mixed doubles with Andrey Jaeger when I was 16. And this is terrible, but it's true. In my head, I celebrated.
Yeah.
Okay. But I wasn't that excited because I remember thinking, yeah, I'm going to win 10 of these in singles. So, what do I care about a mixed doubles for? It turned out to be the only Grand Slam I ever won. But getting to the top 10 was just, of course, I'm getting to the top 10. That was sort of my thought process at that time. So it was a little different for me. I think for Paul, you have to realize, because I talked to him, I don't know, a year and a half ago, and he was close. He'd been 11 and 12 and 13, and he couldn't quite make that breakthrough. So it's nice to see that he finally did. I think he would have done it last year if he hadn't gotten injured. He got injured in Miami. Actually in the semis of Indian Wells, but then hurt it in the third round against Martin Dahm Jr. I think he was going to be top 10. The way he's played, he's definitely top 10.
Do you think Brooksby can get back to being, a havoc maker? We were talking about it. You were on the show years ago when you talked about the match with Djokovic, where if that level would have stayed, you thought he would have beaten him on that day, a run that included beating a Taylor Fritz. But can Brooksby, all the injury issues, the suspension, can he get back to where he believes he should be?
I think so. After what I saw in the Tommy Paul match, he looked a lot like Brooksby. Obviously, he didn't play as well his first match out. He has that special, kind of mind where things don't bother him. I think he talked about it a little bit, an autism type thing that he has. And in some ways, I think that is beneficial in tennis. So I do think he's going to end up having a pretty good career.
It's a special kind of compliment when you talk about players and say, yeah, they just don't want to see this guy. He frustrates them. He plays so unique. And also as a fan, right, we're looking at it like it's good to have some variety, some different ways people play.
Yeah,
so.
Of course. And it's funny when you see someone that's hitting a ball that you think is, I don't know, ugly or unorthodox or whatever, the drop shot, some of the way he produces his strokes. The ball goes. He's another guy that when it hits his strings, it goes in.
Tsitsipas, when he beat him in Indian Wells years ago, was like equal parts dumbfounded and disgusted.
Yeah.
Like, how did that happen? I don't think any of these shots were going in. Like, it was.
But they all go in.
Yeah. Well, the other player, too, the other two players, you have Taylor Fritz and Ben Shelton. Shelton coming off of the semifinal run. This guy seems to continually be the limit. Taylor Fritz has been carrying the mantle as the top-ranked American. What do you expect to see out of these guys, Jimmy, this tournament and then heading into, the Sunshine Double as we have these hardcourt events here?
I think either of those two guys you just mentioned, I wouldn't be shocked at all if they win the tournament. Shelton played really well in his first round. I'm a little burned by Ben because I was sure he would have made top 10 last year because he had this huge part of the season where he hadn't won any matches. He had no points to defend until the US Open, basically. So I just thought he would win enough to get to the top 10, and that wasn't the case. But I do think he keeps improving. That's the most important thing for Shelton, and he definitely has that swagger or that belief system. He makes the semifinals of the US Open playing Djokovic, and he didn't have a scared look.
No.
He expects to be there, and that's a huge thing. So you can't really teach that. And Fritz is a little bit like that as well. They both have that. Of course, I'm one of the best players in the world. I should be in these positions. And again, you can't teach that. That's why they win.
Fritz has that arrogance factor that I think you need in a lot of ways, where he just does not expect, he just does not believe he's going to lose to guys that are ranked below him. And he does not believe it.
And he's kind of right. He hasn't been. That's the facts.
Love the Shelton factor of his dad and his team taking the long approach. Like, we got our eyes miles down the road. We're going to plan to get there. So that's been special. A couple more things here with Jimmy Arias before we wrap up on the Inside In Tennis podcast. I did want to get your thoughts too. It was a shocking retirement for Simona Halep in some ways, loses in Romania. at that event, and basically says what she is hinting at, that I think this is going to be it for me. It was a legendary career in a lot of ways. There's the drama, obviously, of the positive drug test, but this is a world number one for many weeks. This is a two-time major champion. Jimmy, what are your thoughts on this announcement and what Halep's ultimate legacy might be?
Yeah, that's such a tough question. The announcement, if you saw the match that she played, isn't that shocking, because that was about as poor a match as she's probably played since she was 12 years old. So she, as you said, she's had a legendary career. There's no reason to, if she's not going to get the level close to where she once was, that's not, I can understand why you call it quits at that point. So the retirement isn't shocking. It is, where do you put her? How do you think of her? Even Hall of Fame situation. What does she belong in the Hall of Fame? And I don't have an answer to that. I struggle. Obviously, the numbers are Hall of Fame numbers. There's no question about that. It just gives you that little feeling of an asterisk of how much was it? How much help did she get that allowed these type of results?
And I know we can say it's being a little gullible and naive in ways, because there's facts and we'll just never know. That's just how the truth of it is. I would say Hall of Fame, and I would say if you take the ruling on the surface as it was presented, which again we don't know, it was an accidental issue. It was not deliberately trying to cheat the system. She paid the price, probably more so than she should have, given the timeliness of it. That's a whole nother issue. I just think that if you're gonna take it on the surface, I think accidental suspensions, I would be okay with Hall of Fame, given the numbers, the longevity. The fact too is, and we talk about legacy in sports and championships and titles. When you come from a country, Jimmy, that does not have experience in that sport in tennis history, she was a real pioneer for Romania. You heard Anna Bogdan say it, that this was one of the first players we saw that could actually do this. In America, in Australia, for example, you don't necessarily have that, but it's something to be a pioneer from a new country experiencing it.
I mean, as I said, that's why I'm glad I don't vote for Hall of Fame. Her numbers are definitely Hall of Fame. It's not even a question. So, it's a tough one. It's a tough one from that standpoint. You feel for. But in the end of the day, the worst case scenario, if she doesn't make the Hall of Fame, she still has 40 million
40, yeah,
in prize money, and probably a lot more and everything else. So, I don't feel that bad for her.
No. Well, hats off to another amazing career going by the wayside generationally. Some of her era, not really many left of them, but Simona Halep, a great career. The final things I have for you, Jimmy, this has been a great chat. Jimmy Arias on the Inside in Tennis podcast. I want to know what your thoughts are on just another expanded Masters event in Cincinnati. We're doing it again, 14 more days. And you could speak freely, good or bad, on what you think about another tournament going with the 2-week event.
I understand it from the tournament standpoint. That's a lot of extra days of ticket sales. It's a hard answer, because it's also taking weeks away from some other tournaments where there's, we're going to lose a couple of tournaments. And the end of those longer Masters 1000 tournaments are strange. It seems like there's no tennis being played. And I also feel like that feels off to me, because there's too many days of just like one or two matches. So I understand it. I don't know that I love it. From a player standpoint, I guess you'll never be that tired. You always get a day off after every match, even in 2 out of 3 set matches.
I think there might be some mental fatigue with these expanded events. Like you said, not playing, you would know this. Players seem to be creatures of habit. They want to get out. They want to play. A lot of downtime on the same event where you're not going to the next town could be tough. I can just say from a fan standpoint why I'm not really thrilled with this is I love the action of the 1-week Masters. Even the qualifying is like a good level 250 just to get into the tournament. I think what you're going to have is, and I'm a tennis diehard like others, but the first couple of days, first couple rounds of this tournament doesn't bring the excitement. No disrespect to these players, but you're not having the excitement early, and it's going to be more of an easing into these big events. I understand, like you said, it's a business decision why they're doing this, and it makes total sense on that regard. But yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up it kind of takes some excitement out of these events.
Well, it's the beginning of the tournament will have less excitement, and the end of the tournament seems to be slow or something. I know that the end of the tournament's always the same, but it just feels it goes on for 4 days of not many matches. So it's those two things make it a little off for me, but more power to them.
The other last thing, the other news that broke, and as a mixed doubles major champion, what were your thoughts on the U.S. Open basically saying that they want to do it and they plan on doing it the qualifying week? This has been very hotly debated amongst players themselves who are maybe not exactly thrilled.
Yeah. Okay. So as a singles player, which I mostly was, even though my only major was in doubles, I barely played doubles in reality. So as a singles player, I actually would have enjoyed having the mixed doubles the week before, because it gives you an opportunity to play a couple of matches, feeling some pressure in the exact conditions you're about to play a major in. So to me, it's a nice way to get into the U.S. Open. So as a singles player, I probably wouldn't have minded it. As a doubles player, obviously, you're apoplectic about the situation. And also, even as a singles player, if I had a chance to win the US Open mixed doubles, it would feel weird winning it before the tournament has even started. You're holding up the trophy the quality weekend. That's just, there's something about the championship weekend or week that players dream about. You don't dream about winning a championship before the tournament has even started, and that's the part that's a little bit strange. But again, I understand they're adding a day. It's a financial thing. They can sell some tickets that first week.
Seems like that's what drives a lot of this, is the financial side of it, as it is a business. But no, it'll be something to monitor as well. Jimmy Arias, this was a fun chat. Maybe next time I'll introduce you just going forward as mixed doubles major champion Jimmy Arias.
No, don't do that. Don't do that
okay.
to me.
Okay. Well, hey, Jimmy, this is a pleasure. Appreciate you coming on the show. We'll have to do this again soon, of course, but thanks for joining the Inside In Tennis podcast.
No worries. Thanks, Mitch. Be good.
That was Jimmy Arias. This is the Inside In Tennis podcast. We're on all your platforms. Just go to Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, where you get your shows. All part of the Believe Network. You can leave a rating, subscribe, and a nice review as well. And check out the full video episodes on my YouTube channel at Mitch Michals, so you're staying in the loop if you subscribe to there as well. We've got tons of great content, interviews, and guests down the pipe, players, commentators, and coaches. You're not going to want to miss any of it. So for Jimmy Arias, I'm Mitch Michals. This was the Inside In Tennis podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.